Welcome to Strategy Talk, where the editors of Strategy Page discuss current events with a splash of history. I'm Dan Masterson, host of Strategy Talk. With me today is the editor of Strategy Page, well-known military author and game designer Jim Dunnigan. Also joining us is the associate editor of Strategy Page, columnist and author Austin Bay.
Welcome, Austin and Jim. So, Jim, help me out a bit. I am confused. Is Xi in China returning to imperialism, or is he returning to Marxist-Leninism?
Well, China never stopped being a communist police state, but his recent assumption of total power basically makes it less of a market economy, because when he officially took his third term, which is unprecedented, nobody's supposed to do that here since the 1980s, the stock market went down 6%. And a lot of people, entrepreneurs, wealthy people who have, passports for other countries, secondary citizenships, and escape citizenship, so to speak, they are using it and getting out while they still can. Xi has made it clear that he will brook no opposition from anyone. In fact, during the October, meeting they hold every 5 years, the Politburo and what have you, he had his predecessor, Xi Jinping, publicly removed during the meeting. Xi was sitting next to him, and suddenly two guys came up and took him away, and he protested, but that basically summed it up in a nutshell. He also added two new people to the Politburo, the head of the National Police and the head of intelligence. So I think that gives you an idea of where this is going. Before he reached his 10th year, he had himself declared, I forget the exact term, but basically he put himself in the same class of Mao Zedong, one of the founders of, Chinese communism. You could say it's going back to communism, but it's not going to go back very successfully, because it's a market economy that started in the 1980s that has made China rich. And by embracing, a command economy rules, where, you have to go through Xi to get anything, approved. And already a couple of billionaires have had their wings clipped, so to speak, because they apparently did not obey Xi's instructions. It's not looking good. And, of course, China's already in economic problems because they have a real estate bubble, which is bursting. And China is frantically, trying to contain that. Now, they're doing it primarily by having foreigners and a lot of local Chinese investors, eat it, take a haircut, as they say, lose their investment. He's trying to limit the pain on the individuals who are basically paid money up front for an apartment or a home. And Evergreen, the largest real estate company in China, which is in trouble, is not able to complete or even restart construction. That's just one of many problems. I mean, the stock market, of course, but, all over the country, you have economic problems that were never there before. One of them, for example, one of the foreign influences of this is the people who were Japanese and American firms and Western firms, not so much European firms. They're trying to get more business in China. But they basically have moved their operations in China to other high quality but low wage countries like Vietnam, and they are basically showing that they do not believe that China has a future. Now, China is also upset with their former, ally, so to speak, Russia, for getting involved in the war in Ukraine. Xi has basically met with Putin in the last few months, and he did so, in company with the head of India, and they basically delivered the message that proceeding with this war was not good for their relations. Now, both China and India are major customers for Russian goods. Now, China is willing to take a lot of oil from Russia. It's hard to get it because they haven't built the pipelines yet, but they only take it at a large discount. So Russia's making some money, not as much as it did. In fact, Russia just opened the long, projected Arctic, ice-free shipping channel. It's not totally ice-free, but it's ice-free enough, and they have built more icebreakers, to go out front if there's a problem. So Russia's scrambling to move its stalled, oil. The natural gas is another problem. They're basically building new pipelines, but that's going to take several years. So there's great chaos, as it were, in Chinese economics. There's a recent meeting with German companies and the head of Germany, a senior German official, with China to try and broaden relationships. Germans are taking the chance that with everybody else leaving, China might welcome them. That has not been, that has not ended, those discussions and what will come out of it. But these are German firms that basically had to bail out of Russia, and they're hoping China will be more reliable and offer good terms. But that remains to be seen.
So, Austin, what do you see the effects of what Xi has done here recently?
Well, look, let's focus on what he did recently, where he basically makes himself Emperor of China, which is the way that Jim Dunnigan has been framing it in his pieces for strategy page. What Xi's done is put Deng Xiaoping's economic reform revolution that certainly had a fabulous economic and financial payoff for China. He's put it at risk. I'll explain it you have to review what Deng Xiaoping did. 78, 79, Deng formulates what he calls his opening up and reform policies, but basically they were designed to create a market economy within what he called the socialist state, sometimes the greater socialist state, because he realized that for China to modernize, it needed money and it needed technology. And it was going to require connecting to the international trading, international economic system. So that's what opening up and reform that we're going into business. But at the same time, and this comes out in, I've got the year on this because I wrote something about it in Cocktails from Hell, his 4 cardinal principles. And what Deng did with those cardinal principles, he enshrined Communist Chinese Party absolute dominance. One of them is that the cardinal principles is that the Chinese government, the Chinese people would uphold the socialist path. I know that sounds like something out of the Cold War. Well, guess what? It certainly is. But at the same time, in opening up and reform, what Deng said, to have this market economy within the socialist state was going to require more collective leadership. In other words, not just one man rule. It was going to need to be, a party agreement at the top. And collective leadership means that there was going to be no emperor, to use no Mao Zedong in charge until he dies. There'd be changes in leadership, and they'd be approved by the party. They'd go through the congresses, and ideally you get 2 5-year stints, then you're gone. Well, Xi, what's he done? He's completely undermined it, and you live by the 4 cardinal principles. Well, that's complete opposition to the free market energy that produces the economic benefits. it crushes creativity, and the way Xi behaves, he really doesn't care about individual economic initiative. He wants to be able to control it, and that's part of the way his, with his, I'm the permanent president now, and it's a recipe, as Jim was saying, it's a recipe for running China's economic machine into the ground.
So, Jim, what is the rest of the world's reaction to all of this?
Well, like I said, as I pointed out, Germany is trying to broaden its relationship, economic relationships with China. But the countries in the region, like especially Japan and South Korea, they're a little more nervous. I mean, they're closer to it. Japan has been, has taken heat from China occasionally because of their record during World War II. The Chinese won't let them forget that. Of course, the South Koreans will let the Japanese, forget what happened from 1940 to 1945 when Japan ruled Korea. But right now, China is on the outs with their local economies, especially Vietnam, Malaysia, and the two tigers, of course, Taiwan. That's still an issue. Are they going to try and take Taiwan or not? I think not, because they've seen what happens in Ukraine, and I think they'll try and demoralize the Taiwanese before they try an invasion, because Taiwan is very difficult to invade. It's a mountainous country with very few beaches you can land on, and the Chinese have been experimenting with all sorts of workarounds. But there's no working around the fact that, the Taiwanese are willing to fight, and they've been building up their weapons and what have you. So, China is basically losing ground economically, and basically they're not getting that, rapid growth every year. It used to be, for years it was 10% a year. Well, it turned out that was fake, mainly because there was a big scandal when it discovered that provincial officials were under a lot of pressure to meet, the 10%, level, and so they cooked the books to do it. Now, the China is still the second largest economy in the world, but they're not as large as everybody thought they were, and nobody knows exactly how much of a decline there was. As Austin pointed out, there are fears by many foreign and local investors that it's going to be more difficult, if not impossible in some cases, to make money in China, going forward. Yeah, and something else that's been mentioned only tangentially is a big part of the problem are provincial officials. These are members of the Communist Party, and they are very corrupt, but they're also under pressure from the central, the National Communist Party. And there's a certain amount of tension between the two, because some of the provinces are still very poor, and there's a couple of provinces which are extremely rich, and that, I think that's one reason why Xi promoted the head of intelligence and the head of the national police. The national police actually has a fairly large paramilitary contingent, so they can handle a lot of unrest. It has to really get completely out of line before they call in the army. They don't like to call in the army because the army is basically, although it's basically takes an oath of loyalty to the Communist Party, not to China. The generals are, how should I put it, less persuaded that the current path is the way to go, and Xi really is unsure if he should basically politicize the army. In other words, select the senior generals based on their loyalty to him rather than their capabilities. Because, again, they noticed what happened in Ukraine and with the Russians, and China had based its military on Russia. They used similar tanks, similar organization. In some ways, the Chinese were superior because they were producing somewhat superior versions of Russian weapons, and of late they've been producing weapons based on the Western model, especially for their navy. So they are strong, but in certain circumstances, they're not really sure how effective their senior military leadership will be. And if Xi goes for the political appointments for the senior military people, all bets are off. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's one of the many senior leaders who have openly, as well as clandestinely, or the public can't hear him, criticized the military and basically said openly, "Are you really as good as you say you are?" The Army's hasn't fought a war since 1979, and they did poorly. They basically invaded Vietnam to chastise the Vietnamese, and they got beaten. Now, they declared it a victory. They took heavy losses. But the Vietnamese army had, years of experience fighting the Americans, the French, and the South Vietnamese. So they knew what they were doing. They were fighting on their home turf, sort of a mini Ukraine. So China's never forgotten that. And they realized that if they go after Taiwan and possibly spark a wider war, they have to depend a lot more on the Army than the Navy or the Air Force. So, China has problems in the military sector as well. And Xi, seems to be more concerned with his personal power than solving the problems that China has.
Austin, what do you think about Xi's relationship with other countries?
Well, that's a good question, Dan. There are about 6 ways to go with it. Well, one of the things, and this precedes to some degree Xi, but let's take, for example, the big Congo development deal that was first revealed in 2007. I think it was formalized in 2009. China was going to get access to cobalt, the trove of minerals that the Democratic Republic of Congo possesses. But in exchange for that, not only were they going to pay "quote unquote" market prices for the minerals, they were going to build infrastructure in Congo. Initially, that was going to be both roads and hydroelectric power generation. And now, since really 2.5 years ago, but really 2 years ago, that's just come apart because the fraud was revealed. China did not put the billions into infrastructure development. They paid tens of millions, probably a couple of $100 million in bribes to both Congolese and Chinese operatives in Congo and in neighboring nations. And so right there, the systemic corruption through state-owned enterprises, they're essentially the old communist state-run organizations that were recast as if they were, super sized conglomerate companies, except they're not. They're still SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and they're controlled by the Chinese government. And now, and I'm just using Congo as one example, if you go through it, there are at least 18 or 19 other ones around the globe where these developing countries, I'm not going to call them all third world because some of them aren't, are wising up to what this Belt and Road Initiative was about, and also saying that the corruption in China is in the way China deals economically with the rest of the world is it's devastating. And there's something I'll just address it peripherally, is the financial hook that China runs with some of these developing countries, where they get them into debt that the countries can't pay back. So they start squeezing these countries for further concessions and also political concessions, votes in the UN and like. But note, and that's not exactly addressing the question that you asked, Dan, directly, but note Xi Jinping makes a big deal in China domestically attacking corruption. And he's had a number of some of them party big shots, arrested, tried, and imprisoned. A number of the wealthy Chinese magnates that you thought were operating on their own have been stripped of their assets. And it's part of what Xi calls his anti-corruption campaign. Except here's the big corruption. In a dictatorship like China, almost all dictatorships suffer from this. There's no such thing as an honest court. Where mainland China, got away with it was that there were honest courts in Hong Kong. You have British-run, administered type courts where you could have a contract litigated. Well, not anymore, Dan. And why? Because Xi Jinping violated the Sino-British Treaty that was supposed to at least protect Hong Kong democracy until 2047. There you go. He really didn't care. And that's when Jim talks about Xi putting China's economic miracle at risk, there's another example. Here's the other thing, internationally, and we do hear a lot about this in the United States and Canada, and that is Chinese Communist Party spying. And this is now known worldwide that since the CCP really owns every company in China, that they can use that company as an intelligence resource, if not an addition to their spy agency. It's worse than that, because ultimately the CCP, and I don't mean this literally, but they own every Chinese citizen, at least in their ability to force them to act as agents of influence and spy. I mean, that's something that happened here in the United States, where even Chinese citizens who were working here for an American company or studying were coerced into taking on missions for the CCP. And if it's not done and they're getting paid extra money, they threaten their families back in China. And that's a deep corruption. In this instance, the way I would I'd answer your question succinctly, Xi epitomizes the worst in communist apparatus corruption. I mean, the whole corporate structure that they have on the surface is ultimately a charade, because you're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party, and ultimately, since he's all powerful now, with the whims of Xi Jinping.
Well, we'll leave it there. Watch with interest how the reign of Xi goes, and we'll talk to you gentlemen next time.